Hello everybody, Brad Johnson here. I have another exciting video for everybody today, as I'm going to be sharing a lot more information about intuitive discoveries of our solar system. So it was actually last night, I was going into meditation, and I was going into a deeper state of being. And I'm going to be talking more about the process in another video. But basically, as I was able to astral project and go through claircognizance, I was able to discover certain, I guess you'd say, discoveries of our solar system that I'm going to reveal in this video. So hold on to your hats. We got quite a few things to cover here regarding these discoveries. So the first planet I actually went to look into was, of course, Saturn. So I looked into Saturn, and I kind of saw Saturn from a distance. But more than that, I was connecting directly to Saturn's consciousness, planetary consciousness, or sun consciousness, or as Saturn once existed a long time ago, as a sun and not just a planet, basically going into a type of descent. So as I looked into Saturn, I was able to look at quite a few of its celestial bodies, a lot of its moons, so to speak. And the best thing I could say about Saturn is it's kind of like a celestial queen. Okay, Saturn is actually feminine, not masculine. And I know we get this impression of thinking that Saturn is a masculine planet, but it's not. It's basically, we could refer to her as Saturnia. And she's a goddess in that way. And I know a lot of the Cabal groups basically would worship her as if she's a demon in that way, or a devil, right? And basically looking at the Saturn energy, or, you know, the dark stuff, so to speak, which I won't get too much into. But basically, that's not how I was seeing her. As I was looking into her, there's a lot of secrets that she keeps within the surface of her being. But she's very much of a planet that is kind of like a gateway to the celestial realms. So it's kind of like looking at many of these gateways, so to speak, looking through her body. And she has a great deal of these celestial portals that help to connect to some very powerful dynamic realms, almost like godlike realms. It's quite interesting as I was tuning into her. And it's kind of like if you're looking at the clouds of Saturn, you're not actually seeing clouds to what we would understand. These are much more clouds of ether. So it's kind of like looking at a honeycomb web when it comes to Saturnia, or Saturn. This representing a grid. And like I said, you're kind of looking at these different pockets of reality. Because like I said, when you look at the clouds of Saturn, they're not the clouds like what we have on Earth. They are much more etheric in nature. It's a very much more of a higher world that represents Saturnia, or Saturn. And they all represent these different pockets of dimensions. And so you could say that Saturn would be like a type of multi-dimensional world. That she has these pockets of different realities coexisting within her planetary sphere. And of course, there's the Saturn rings. But like I said, the Saturn rings feel much more like kind of like a shackle than anything else. But the good news is that the rings of Saturn have actually thinned out a great deal, which means there's been a lot of cleanup taking place around the Saturnian system, and I could certainly sense that. The Saturnian system used to be filled with draconian activity, but there's a lot less there now than what there used to be. So a lot more of the moons of Saturn are actually being reoccupied. They're being reoccupied by, we could say, illuminating forces, counter forces in that way. So the Saturnian system is actually getting cleaned up. There's been a lot of evacuation surrounding Saturn. So that's a step in the right direction. But Saturn herself, Saturnia, really represents kind of like a portal junction gateway system. So it's quite interesting. I wasn't able to go too much deeply into it, but there's just a lot of fascinating energies surrounding Saturn, right? So like I said, she's kind of more of a honeycomb, and she's much more of a multi-dimensional planet. And speaking of multi-dimensional planet, of course, we have Jupiter. Okay, we'll just put the famous red spot there. Okay, and Jupiter was the next planet I was looking at. Now, of course, Jupiter, yes, is masculine. Now, the interesting thing about Jupiter is the best way I interpreted it when I was looking at it claircognizantly through astral projection is I was saying Jupiter is kind of like the Mount Kailash of the star system. Okay, and just as we have Mount Kailash in the Himalayas, okay, which again is kind of like a mystical mountain. There was only one known man that was able to climb all the way up to Mount Kailash. But everybody else who has attempted to climb there has never been able to do so. And Mount Kailash feels like like a dimensional portal of celestials, right? Like celestial gods that reign supreme over that mountain, right? It's almost like the mountain of Shiva. Well, Jupiter would be the equivalent of that. Jupiter would be like this mighty royalty planet that is a direct link to mighty sovereignty, celestial energy altogether, okay? And it too, its clouds, storms in that sense, these are not typical storms, typical clouds that we have here on Earth. It's just a very different dimension, okay? So we're looking at kind of like Jupiter and Saturn being like the king and the queen of these higher monumental planes that exist on kind of higher celestial levels. So we're looking at kind of like the celestial planes of the gods, and that Jupiter and Saturn are deeply connected to those particular realms, just like we would look into Mount Kailash here on Earth and get that impression that, again, this is a place of the gods. This is like a portal of the gods. Well, these are the planets of the gods, Jupiter and Saturn specifically. Okay. So I looked into a little bit of that, and I just got that feeling as I was looking into Jupiter. So yeah, there's definitely a celestial, a sovereignty energy there. It is another multi-dimensional planet, as I would understand Saturn. He is also kind of like the mighty king of the star system. Jupiter being the mighty king, Saturnia, Saturn being the mighty queen. Right? So I just kind of briefly looked into both of those planets and just seeing their kind of their majesty. It was beautiful. Like I said, Saturn used to be a star and descended into a planetary sphere, okay, a long time ago. This actually goes back into ancient Greece, where they would actually talk about Saturnia being the second star in the sky, right? But of course, she went through a descent. She went through a downfall and moved into a planetary consciousness. So that's what I have for Saturn and Jupiter. And of course, the third planet I was looking at was Mars. Okay, and just kind of as I look into the heart of the planet, and I look at the heart of Mars and I said, this is a graveyard. This is a cemetery. Okay, that's really what Mars represents to me. When I looked at Mars, when I looked at the red planet, so to speak, it just felt like it was a dying world that's trying to recover. Okay, the good news is he still has life in him, but he has been brutalized majorly, okay, being the planet of war. But it's kind of like I could see it as a cemetery or a graveyard, or almost kind of like an empty battlefield where there's just a lot of bodies, right? And that's what I get. So I get this really kind of low sinking feeling when I tune into Mars's energy, because he was once a very strong, thriving, Earth-like world, ripe with pure civilization and advanced technologies, very similar to like what we would see in Atlantis, right? We'd see ancient pyramids, we'd see ancient temples, we'd see all these ancient structures that have all these powerful ancient technologies, like what we'd find in Atlantis or Mu, or Lemuria. Mars had that to a very great extent. But of course, it was always about civilization takeover. It was more about internal wars, and then it led into interplanetary wars as well too, pertaining to Mars, because we had quite a lot of psychopathic kings and rulers on Mars that were basically just trying to overthrow more territory that would even extend beyond their planet, right? And of course, they met their end. They had asteroid collisions on Mars, and this is why I see when I look at Mars, it's more of a graveyard. It's more of a cemetery right now. But we'll see how things go when we look into the distant future, where there will certainly be an attempt of restoration for Mars to bringing him back into former glory. So that's what I got out of Mars, right? So basically, Mars has gone through quite a challenge, going through a very powerful descent, and then down the road, maybe we'll see an ascent with Mars once again. Okay, so that's what I got out of Mars. Then I went to Venus. Okay, now Venus, very different story, complete opposite of Mars. Okay, she is a goddess. She is a bright, shining, luminous, beautiful goddess. She's like the light of our entire star system. She's an ancient world. Her light is even stronger than Earth's. Okay? Earth has a beautiful light to her. But Venus, she's shining even brighter because of her ancient ways, the ancient life. A lot of life on Venus, a lot of it has migrated to Earth, right? So we have a lot of ancient life forms from Venus that is also on Earth at the same time, right? From a lot of the insect kingdom, flora and fauna kingdoms as well too, right? Even certain forms of mammals, reptiles as well. You can find them similarly on Venus. Now, of course, modern science will tell you something different. Oh, that Venus is about 600 degrees, 700 degrees Fahrenheit, and if you dare try to walk on her surface, you'll just melt. And if you had a big block of lead, you'd melt lead as soon as it came into the surface, and as soon as it came into the atmosphere of Venus, the lead would melt. So there's no way you could ever go on Venus. And that is the biggest bunch of crap ever, okay? They actually launched satellites onto Venus. They launched launchers onto Venus as well too, from the Russians. And they were able to successfully land on Venus's surface without being melted into a puddle of goo. So there you go right there, is they're telling lies. We even have surface-based shots of Venus at the same time, okay? So Venus, like many of the other planets, has a dimensional veil around her, basically casting a hologram, to giving the impression of her being a barren planet, when in fact this actually isn't true. There is a civilization on Venus, they just exist in a different dimension, right? As part of the kind of solar agreement that we're going through here to give human beings the impression that they're the only ones here in this star system, all part of their evolution in that way. But basically, we can tune into different dimensional pockets and seeing these beautiful, thriving civilizations, like crystalline cities, crystalline pyramids, and just such a very pure spiritual culture. And Venus herself represents that. A very pure, crystalline consciousness on a planetary level. So she's very much like the diamond that's shining in the star system. She has just such brilliant love, brilliant compassion. Like I said, she just shines brightly. She shines her light. She lights up the entire star system. That's the feeling I got as Venus as I was tuning into her. Then I also tuned into Mercury. Okay, and I looked into Mercury just a little bit. Honestly, Mercury doesn't feel too remarkable to me. I wasn't really picking up anything of great interest pertaining to Mercury other than Mercury being the ancient moon for Earth. Okay? Mercury, from what I discovered in a lot of my own past intuitive discoveries, was that Mercury was once our moon, right? And of course, there was a time to where Mercury left our orbit, and then in time, we have our current moon here, which has been around for about 13,000 years or so, approximately, through our atmosphere, or in our orbit, I should say. So Mercury, I just found it as to be kind of like a base as well too. There's again different types of civilizations there, but it wasn't really anything too phenomenal, right? I wasn't really feeling. So as I tap into the consciousness of the planetary body, I wasn't finding anything too spectacular about Mercury, right? So there's bases there, there's installations there, but it's almost kind of like a watching station. And so I didn't really find anything too powerful about it. Okay, it was something that was kind of more mediocre in that way. It's a beautiful spherical world, of course, but yeah, I wasn't finding anything of great interest. Not like what I was seeing from a lot of these other celestial bodies. So Mercury was kind of mundane, just from what I could detect. There was nothing that really stood out, other than, yeah, there's some installations on Mercury, there's some civilizations, and they're kind of like watchers on Mercury altogether. So as I steered away from Mercury, I was able to discover something else quite interesting. So here's our sun, okay? Here's Mercury right here. Of course, it's not the scale. But as I was tuning in between the sun and Mercury, there was another object here, okay? And I was getting curious about that. So, okay, I can sense intuitively that there's another object here by the sun, and it has some kind of skewed orbit. Its orbit feels a little skewed. It's not in parallel with a lot of how the planets naturally revolve around the sun. This was some sort of object that was closer to the sun than Mercury. So Mercury is not actually the closest celestial object to the sun. There's something else, okay? And the only impression I was getting was either feeling that it was either some type of moon or some type of asteroid or some other form of celestial body. And so I actually looked on Google afterwards, and I was able to pull up an article, and that scientists were able to use a new type of telescope, and they were able to discover that there is indeed a celestial object closer to the sun than Mercury, and that Mercury would not technically be the closest celestial object to the sun. So that kind of confirmed it for me, because I had no idea about that. I was just tuning in between that, and I could feel this presence. I could feel this presence of, again, whether it was a moon or a comet or an asteroid or something of that nature. And I was just getting intuitively that it has some type of skewed orbit. So I put the article in the video description about that, because I looked afterwards. I did some research after I had my intuitive discoveries. And I found this article about the idea that, yeah, we found some type of asteroid. It has some kind of strange orbit, and it is closer to the sun than Mercury. So I thought that was quite interesting. But I didn't really bother to kind of tap into the object too much. Again, it didn't really feel too special. It's just something that's kind of having a kind of skewed orbit around the sun that, again, is just closer than Mercury in that way. So I just thought that was kind of interesting. The second to last thing that I looked at, because I'm saving kind of the best for last. The second to last thing I was looking at is I was seeing these spherical objects very, very close to the sun, okay? And they're not basically the indigenous celestial objects that we have in the star system, like a planet, right? But I would see a lot of these spheres just hanging around very, very close to the sun. The reason why I wasn't really counting them is because these are basically spacecraft, okay? And they're planetary-sized spacecraft, but they're not indigenous to this star system. And that they basically come through portals of the sun. And so I would tune into a lot of them. And some may say, well, maybe we're looking at planetary spaceships that are going to be used as evacuation craft should anything happen in the star system. That's not what I was getting at all when I was tuning into them. As I was tuning into them, they're basically linked to the sun. And they're almost collecting intelligence directly from the sun altogether. So they're here more for the sun and not for us. they're basically linked directly to the sun, and they're collecting this kind of etheric intelligence from the sun. And that's basically the best way I can put it. They don't really have a direct role that we could exactly specify. The best thing I could say is that they're intelligence collectors and they're watchers at the same time. But that's really the best thing I could get. But there's just these gigantic planetary-sized spheres that are just incredibly close to the sun. I would say maybe even just miles apart in that way. And they're, again, just kind of sitting by the sun, absorbing a lot of this information, this intelligence from the sun. So I found that was quite interesting. But there have been, over the years, satellite photos of these spherical objects that would be coming out of the sun, and they would basically just become stationary around the sun. So that's kind of a confirmation I was getting as well too. Over the years, we've had a lot of different planetary spacecraft, and they would come out through sunspots, and they would just park themselves right by the sun, and they would just kind of sit there. And so as I tuned into them, their interest really is of our sun. They're not really interested in Earth. They're not really interested in a lot of the happenings within the star system. If they are, it's mostly just as a watcher perspective and nothing more. But their interest is of the sun. So my guess is that they're sun intelligence collectors. So quite interesting. So now I said I would save the best to last. And I looked at one more thing before retiring, and then wanted to look more into that asteroid situation that was closer to the sun than Mercury. So I looked into one more thing. So if our sun is right here, okay, we have what's known as the Oort cloud. Okay, and this really is the most fascinating thing of all. When we look at the Oort cloud, okay, we're basically looking at, again, a cloud of ether. That's its nature. But when you actually look into the Oort cloud, you would see all these planets covering the entire Oort cloud. And you'd have hundreds, if not thousands, of Earth-like planets in the Oort cloud. Hundreds, if not thousands. I couldn't even count them, really. I was just getting a glimpse of all these different planets. There's some other planets that aren't quite Earth-like, right? That could look more like moons in that way. But there's a lot of them that look like Earths, right? So you have at least hundreds of Earth-like worlds contained within the Oort cloud itself. And as I was tuning into it kind of collectively, you have species of every different kind. We could say that you pretty much have the 6 root races, okay, which would be human, reptilian, okay, aquatics, kind of like amphibians or fish, cetaceans, etc. Okay, you would have mammalians, mammals, so kind of like lions, lion beings, feline beings, etc. Okay, you would have insectoids, and you'd have avians. Okay, these would be the common 6 root races that are commonly found throughout a majority of planets throughout our entire galaxy. Okay, and you would have them basically in their sentient form, which means that you would have them kind of human-like, right? So you would have like a mantis that's kind of standing up like a human, right? They're kind of more bipedal in that way. So we'd have, I would say, as I call it, the sentient version of the 6 root races. Okay, and they cover a great deal of these planets inside the Oort cloud. Now again, the insectoids are basically the popular ones, I would say. The insectoids basically have a lot of coverage with a lot of these planets, right? Even a lot of jurisdiction with these planets as well too. The insectoids also have a lot of jurisdiction pertaining to the Earth at the same time. So it wouldn't surprise me once upon a time that Earth once existed in the Oort cloud, okay? that our Earth right here once was in here, was inside the Oort cloud, and that she was chosen to leave the Oort cloud and basically come here and be part of the planetary solar system dynamic matrix. Okay, so she's a unique jewel out of the hundreds or even the thousands of Earth-like planets. And I was looking at that, I said, oh, that's incredible. Can you imagine when we start exploring the galaxy and we go out into the Oort cloud and we see hundreds or even thousands of these Earth-like planets, how long it would take to try and investigate every single one? You're looking at hundreds of thousands or millions of years. But that's if we look at it linearly. I know that when we actually go out into the star system, when we start going out into space, everything is going to be quantum-based. So with quantum-based, you'll have a great deal of management pertaining to the state of time. So you'll be able to go to different places and being able to manage the constant as it relates to time. So that the idea of the aging process won't be as severe, because if we're looking at trying to explore all these things linearly, it take millions and millions and millions of years. And again, we'll get to the point on a quantum level where we'll be able to almost, as it were, compress or shrink time to go and look into a multitude of these different planets simultaneously. That's quite interesting. But it just really blew me away as I was looking into the Oort cloud, as I was looking into all these planets that are contained inside the Oort cloud. Of course, modern science, either they don't have a clue and they're just keeping their ignorance intact, or they do have a clue, but they're keeping their mouth shut, okay? But you're looking at hundreds of Earths, perhaps even thousands, okay? I didn't get an exact number. There's a lot of them. So Earth really is not so special. I mean, of course, our Earth is special in her own way, but as it relates to the Earth-like planet, the Oort cloud is within our star system. It's kind of like the boundary of our star system. And there's hundreds, if not thousands, of Earth-like planets covering the Oort cloud. Really interesting stuff. And like I said, pretty much all the worlds cover, in some shape, way, or form, the 6 root races that are occupying these worlds. And my feeling is, and it's just a feeling, that again, our Earth was once part of the Oort cloud and has been there for an even longer period of time, and then migrated, was being brought here into completing the dynamic planetary solar system matrix that we call our star system. So it's very, very interesting stuff. So I just wanted to share these intuitive discoveries with everybody because I found it quite fascinating. And in another video, I'll be talking more about how I was able to do this, how I was able to work much more deeper with intuition, using kind of a combination between astral projection and working with my own claircognizance. So that will be in a video to come. So thank you very much for tuning in to this video. Hope you enjoyed it, and I'll speak to you again in another perspective of the now. Om Shanti, Shanti, Shanti. Namaskar. Thank you very much for checking out the New Earth Teachings YouTube channel. Feel free to like, comment, share, and subscribe. And you can check out the websites, newearthteachings.com, where you can order a private session, 3 questions by email, EQ method, and a lot more. And you can also check out healingcodecards.com, where you can grab your mind deck, your body deck, and of course the brand new Body Deck Special Edition. All of these are available in digital editions as well. And you can also get a shirt just like this through healingcodeshop.com, where you can experience the healing codes in apparel form. So feel free to check out these websites. Thank you so much, and I'll speak to you again in the next video. Be well.